Great. So today I want to talk about this tweet from Stefan Molyneux. It's one of the most, I would say, one of the most eye-opening tweets I've seen from pretty much anyone, at any point. And it's something that I've kind of recognized, but the way he kind of sums it up is really good. So I'll read it and then we'll get into it a little bit here. Now, he goes on to say, Democrats are always describing their constituents as total losers who can't save money, plan for retirement, take care of their health, or get a job. Wouldn't basic pride just make you walk away? Now, you could say the same thing, liberals in Canada or even the NDP in more provincial and federal places. And it's very true and it's very sad. And this is some, like I say, it's something that I'm surprised I haven't. I mean, I've always kind of keyed into it, but the way that he puts it is that it's very telling that if you're running a platform on we're going to save you from all your terrible decisions, then what does that say about you? Like, what does that say about you? Like, that's like saying, yeah, I'm dating you because you're ugly, or I'm hiring you to do this, you know, janitor job or whatever because you're too dumb or incompetent to do anything that isn't a minimum wage job. Like, that's basically what the leftist politicians are saying about the people that vote for them. And that's why, again, I don't really have much respect, especially for the politicians, but a lot of these people. And that generally, like I said, there's always exceptions to people point out, well, I know someone like this, or I vote for the left and I'm not like this. Well, yeah, of course there's exceptions, but when we're talking about millions of people, we don't care about exceptions. So again, I just wanted to point that out, like always. But it's basically whenever you vote for these policies, it's basically probably 90-95% of the time a confession that it depends. Either you're a complete like loser, for lack of a better word, who just wants to mooch off people, or you're someone who views yourself as not being able to accumulate enough resources for yourself to get by. And you see other people who are able to do that, and it makes you very jealous, and you want to steal from them. And again, it's not, people say, well, we redistribute wealth. Redistribute is just a nice way of saying steal. Like, again, like when it comes to all this political stuff, like, let's just be honest about what's actually going on here. Like, again, one of the main reason for all this political divide nowadays is that we have much of people's intentions. They're just flat out lying, and that they're trying to polish a turd kind of thing. And we need to be more honest about it. But getting back to the topic at hand here, um, this is something that it really goes to show the difference in that if you're promising, take for example, if you're promising to cut healthcare spending, if you're promising to cut taxes, if you're promising to do, cut regulations, all that kind of stuff, what you're saying is that, I mean, by default, the people that are voting for you are people who are more healthy, who are able to provide for themselves, and who are more likely to not want to take from other people to get by. That's what you're saying by definition. Now, it's generally what the right does, generally, because the big problem with the right or conservatives nowadays is that they tend to, they'll have a conservative or a Republican, mark next to their name, but they're not really conservative, or at least in the traditional way that conservatives actually, tended to be for the vast majority of history. And that, the less government, the better, the less taxes, the better, the less regulation, the better, the less, crony capitalism, the better. Um, so again, that's something I wanted to point out as well. But again, I really need to reiterate this point because people really don't seem to understand it. And the minute you put it this way, it's very eye-opening when you put it this way. It's incredibly eye-opening because the idea that you need to be bailed out for every decision that you've made in your life, like I say, it's just a confession that you've completely missed the mark in your life. That's not, something that whenever I get into debates with these leftists, I'll inevitably, you know, not inevitably, but I've had multiple times where I've made the point that people on the right tend to be people of higher intelligence, and people on the left tend to be people of lower intelligence, and they'll viciously deny that. Viciously deny that, even though the studies back it up. Um, and and it's for the simple reason too that the smarter you are, the more money you make on average. So for the leftist theory to be right, you would have to argue that people who make more money would advocate for more taxes, which means less money in their pocket, and poorer people would advocate for less taxes, which means less money in their pocket. So the leftist idea, thinking that smarter people tend to vote for them, is smarter and less intelligent people are both more likely to vote against their own self-interest, which doesn't make any sense. If you simply put it as in people do what's in their own best self-interest, all of a sudden it makes sense. So again, I really wanted to point that out. But this just goes to show just where we're at with the left, and this is why even though I'm not a conservative, I didn't vote. I've never voted conservative federally, and I mean I've only been able to vote for 2 elections anyway. Only one, maybe 2 provincial elections. I don't even remember about the one before, but um, even though, like I say, even though I'm not a conservative, the reason why I'm so hard on the left and more friendly towards the right, I always mention it, but people never seem to listen, is that the left receives literally, especially in Canada, like in the States, there's Fox, which is, people think Fox is this biased partisan right wing site, which it is to an extent, but not nearly to the extent of a CNN or a CBC in Canada. Um, like I say, in Canada, there's no mainstream media criticism of the left. Literally none. There's nothing that Justin Trudeau could do. There's nothing that the NDP could do in BC or Alberta or any country that you're in, sorry, any province that's run. I know Alberta isn't run by an NDP government right now, but when they were, there's nothing they could do that will get CBC to criticize them. Like literally, like find one time that isn't an opinion article where CBC has been heavily critical of a left wing government. Like I'd really like to see it. And like I say, there probably is one time, but compared to the amount of times that they're critical of the right, like that's the one thing too, is that most of the time when they're critical of the right, it's stuff that's completely made up, like completely made up. Like this whole calling that one MP racist because he criticized, Tam, the health minister, or whatever official position she is. I don't even remember right now, but she was clearly wrong about a lot of the stuff she said. A lot of the stuff she said, blatantly wrong, and more than likely killed, and infected a lot of people because of terrible advice from her. And yet, someone criticizing her is accused of being racist, which is, in my mind, even if it's clearly not racist, like clearly not racist. And this idea that anytime a white person criticizes someone who's not white is racist is, I mean, that's a problem too with the term racist. It doesn't really mean anything anymore. That's something that the left doesn't seem to understand. And anybody with a shred of critical thinking skills, the minute someone accuses someone of being racist, it's like, you know, it's almost like it's like that you've lost the argument kind of thing. If you ever heard in philosophy circles about, oh, whenever someone brings this up, they've lost the argument by default. Whenever someone on the left brings up the race card or the sexist card, any of that kind of stuff, you've lost the argument by default. So again, I just wanted to point that out. But basically, to bring the video here full circle, um, running on, or thinking that, the only way you're going to get reelected, which it is for the left, is that the only way you can do it is to have a population of people that is poor, dumb, unhealthy, can't get by without government assistance. It's just going to show that your voters tend to be people who are, like I say, poor, unintelligent, unhealthy, and can't hold down a job. And like you say, a lot of the time it's not people's fault too. Like you don't choose your level of intelligence. Like IQ is largely genetic. You can, some of it is environmental, so you can improve it a little bit. There's some health ailments that are, you know not lifestyle related, but most are. So, and that's not to say too, like maybe, if you're someone who isn't overly intelligent, your upside isn't a $500,000 a year or $1 million a year. Maybe your upside's, 60, $70,000 a year. That's still decent. Rather than working a minimum wage job, you could get, two, three times that if you actually try it. And if there and the problem too is that, unintelligent, people prone to this kind of stuff, the minute that they get any sort of an incentive to do it, they're going to do it. And that's the problem with these leftist policies, is that they create massive incentives for people to be unhealthy, poor, not working, not plan for their retirement, all this kind of stuff. And that's why they continue to do this kind of stuff, because it creates dependency. It creates dependency. And that's the goal, because the more people dependent, the more likely they are to get elected. That it's just that plain and simple. It's a very, very simple concept. So anyway, I wanted to point this out because it's a very telling tweet, a very telling thought that, like I say, this is something to point. Again, I like to point these kind of things out when you get into political debates. Point stuff like this out. Like, point stuff like this out. Like, if the leftist policies are so good, why is there always describing their constituents and people voting for them as being people completely, don't have, if it wasn't for the government, they'd be homeless. If it wasn't for the government, they wouldn't be able to retire. And if it wasn't for, free healthcare, they wouldn't. And don't the states has free healthcare too if you're poor too. People seem to think that it's this bastion of the free market, which it is to a small extent, but it isn't in reality. And people who if it wasn't for the government, they wouldn't be able to get by. So um, again, just point that out, and you'll get a long way. Now you probably won't find any common ground, because there's no way to find common ground with these kind of people. But again, just point that kind of stuff out. So anyway, I'm gonna leave the video there. If you'd like to, make sure you hit that like and subscribe. Check out my PayPal and email. I got linked in the description. I appreciate any donations, but at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe. And last thing, as always, check out my BitChute channel as well.